John had never imagined that his life would bring him to the floating palace of the Zyrathians, a proud alien race known across galaxies for their power, wealth, and strict rules. He was just a janitor, a simple human who swept floors, emptied trash bins, and polished metal halls. Yet here he was, standing at the enormous sliding doors of the palace, staring up at the shimmering towers that seemed to touch the clouds. The palace was alive with strange sounds, humming engines, distant chatter in alien tongues, and the soft squeak of hovering cleaners moving along the walls. The air smelled faintly metallic, mixed with a scent that John could only describe as a mix of spices and ozone. He had been warned by the human embassy, "Stay out of trouble. Clean the halls. Do not touch anything important." But John already sensed that trouble had a way of finding him. It began with a small scream. One of the palace children, tiny, three-eyed, and bright blue, was crying loudly in the grand playroom. John paused, mop in hand, and peered through the doorway. Several other children had gathered, looking frustrated and disappointed. In the middle of the room lay a small, broken toy. But it was no ordinary toy. It was a tiny, hovering starship, crafted with alien technology that John could barely understand. Its lights flickered weakly, and one of its tiny wings dangled awkwardly to the side. "Another human, fix it," one of the palace servants hissed from the corner, seeing John. The voice was harsh, filled with disbelief. Humans were not supposed to touch the things of the royals. They were cleaners, nothing more. But John felt a strange pull toward the toy, as if it were calling him. He stepped into the room carefully, careful not to trip over the hovering platforms that carried food and toys. The children stared at him, their large, curious eyes wide. One of the little ones, a girl with violet skin and tiny golden horns, reached out and whimpered, "Papa, help?" John blinked. He didn't know what to say. "Papa?" he repeated, unsure if he understood. The words seemed innocent yet full of hope. He smiled awkwardly, trying to hide his nerves. The room was tense. A few of the palace engineers, tall, thin aliens with transparent skin showing their glowing veins, stood nearby, arms crossed. They were muttering among themselves, clearly annoyed that a human was approaching a toy they had failed to repair. Their tools, shining with advanced energy, lay untouched on the floor. John knelt down slowly, examining the tiny starship. He didn't understand the alien technology, not really, but he had worked with machines before. Gears, wires, small engines, he knew enough from fixing old robots back on Earth. He carefully touched the broken wing, testing its weight. His fingers moved carefully, almost instinctively, adjusting tiny components, reconnecting a loose wire here, pressing a tiny lever there. The children gasped. Their cries softened, replaced by a hushed anticipation. John worked in silence, his brow furrowed in concentration. The palace staff muttered among themselves, doubting a human could do what their advanced engineers could not. But John did not think about doubt. He only thought about fixing the toy, about seeing the children happy. Slowly, very slowly, the starship's lights brightened. A faint hum filled the air. One of its wings straightened. The hovering mechanism flickered, then steadied. The children cheered softly, their voices a mixture of excitement and relief. John sat back, wiping his hands on his uniform, smiling at the little faces staring at him. "There," he said quietly. "All fixed." The youngest child, the one who had first called him Papa, ran forward and hugged his leg. "Papa, Papa," he shouted. The others followed, laughing and clinging to him. John froze for a moment, overwhelmed by the warmth and trust of these tiny alien beings. The palace engineers were silent, their mouths slightly open. The royal servants exchanged nervous glances. Never had a human earned such affection, never had one dared to touch what they could not. And yet here was John, the simple janitor, holding the admiration of the youngest members of the royal family. John looked around at the grand playroom, the walls decorated with floating holograms, the ceiling stretching higher than he could see, the toys hovering and whirring. It was magnificent. And yet, in that moment it did not matter. What mattered was the laughter, the small hands holding his, the eyes that saw him not as a servant, but as someone who could make things better. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. "I'm just a janitor," he muttered, almost to himself. But the children ignored that, calling him Papa, again and again. For the first time in his life, John realized that sometimes, being human meant more than skill or rank. It meant heart, courage, and the willingness to step forward when no one else would. And in the heart of the Zyrathian palace, the human janitor had done exactly that. The morning after John fixed the tiny starship, the palace was buzzing more than usual. Children ran through the corridors, laughing and chattering in their strange alien language, each carrying a small toy in their hands. Yet despite the joy, there was tension in the air. One toy, a larger, more complex mechanical dragon, had broken and nobody knew how to fix it. John was pushing a cleaning cart down a long hallway when he heard the familiar cries. The sound made him pause. Even before he rounded the corner, he could see the shiny scales of the dragon toy lying in pieces on the marble floor. Its wings twitched weakly, its tiny eyes dim, and a soft, high-pitched whine emitted from its tiny energy core. The children gathered around it, their antennae drooping and their claws wringing in frustration. "They'll never fix it," one palace servant whispered to another. "It's too complex. Only the palace engineers could handle something like that, and even they have failed." John's curiosity pulled him closer. He looked at the dragon toy, noting the intricate wires and floating circuits. It was unlike anything he had seen back on Earth. Yet somehow he felt drawn to it. Just like the starship, it seemed to demand attention, and John felt that if he tried, maybe he could help. The engineers were already there. Tall, thin, with glowing veins and eyes that seemed to pierce through him, they stood with their advanced tools hovering at their sides. Their faces were rigid, betraying irritation and disbelief. "Human," one of them hissed. "Step back. This is beyond your abilities." John paused, gripping the handle of his mop cart. He knew the rules. Humans were not supposed to touch royal possessions, especially not toys. But the pleading faces of the children stopped him. Their little hands reached toward him, their eyes wide and full of hope. "Papa," the smallest one whispered again. The word struck John like a chord. He realized that the bond he had formed yesterday wasn't gone. It wasn't just admiration, it was trust. And trust, he knew, was more important than fear. Carefully he knelt in front of the dragon toy. Its circuits flickered weakly as if sensing his touch. John's fingers traced the broken wing, noting a loose energy filament and a misaligned propulsion coil. He had no formal training in alien technology, yet he could see the problem clearly. The engineers muttered among themselves, shaking their heads. "He doesn't understand the complexity," one said. "It will never work." But John did not listen. He began to work slowly, methodically, adjusting tiny components and reconnecting wires. His movements were confident, born not from knowledge of alien engineering, but from logic and intuition. He remembered how he had fixed machines back on Earth. Old computers, broken printers, toys, even small robots. Human ingenuity was often simple, practical, and direct. He applied the same ideas here. The children watched in awe. The dragon's wings twitched more steadily, its tiny eyes glowing brighter. A soft hum filled the room as the energy core stabilized. The little one who had called him Papa yesterday reached forward, pressing a claw against John's shoulder as if urging him on. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. John adjusted the dragon's tail, carefully twisted a broken rotor, and aligned the tiny gears. Each small correction brought the toy closer to life. The engineers leaned forward, their brows furrowed, unable to hide their shock. They had relied on their advanced tools and complex procedures, but this human janitor, with only his hands and logic, was succeeding where they had failed. Finally, with a soft whir and a flicker of glowing lights, the dragon stretched its wings. It hovered, steady and strong, circling the room gracefully. The children gasped, their cries turning into laughter. "Papa! Papa!" they shouted together, running to hug John. The engineers could no longer hide their astonishment. They whispered to one another, almost reluctantly, "How?" John smiled, brushing his hands on his uniform. "Sometimes things just need a little common sense," he said quietly. He didn't mean to boast, but there was a quiet pride in his voice. The children clung to him, their small bodies pressing against his legs, and for a moment the palace felt different, warmer, lighter, and full of laughter. One of the senior engineers finally stepped forward. "Human," he said slowly, his voice tinged with respect, "your methods, they work. Perhaps, we have underestimated you." John shrugged. "I just fixed the toy," he said simply. Yet he felt a strange satisfaction. It wasn't about recognition or titles, it was about making the children happy, about seeing joy where there had been frustration. As the dragon swooped around the room, the children cheered louder than ever. Their trust in John was absolute now. "Papa, Papa," they repeated, their voices echoing through the grand halls. For John, the sound was more powerful than any reward or praise. In that moment he realized something important. The Zyrathians might see humans as weak, limited, or ordinary, but he had shown them something different. That humans could solve problems in ways even the most advanced aliens could not. And sometimes all it took was heart, patience, and the courage to step forward when others would not. John looked at the glowing eyes of the dragon toy, then at the happy children surrounding him. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. Tomorrow, he thought, would surely bring more broken toys, more challenges, but he also knew one thing for certain. Wherever there was a problem, he, a simple human janitor, could make a difference. And the children's voices calling him Papa reminded him that sometimes, a small act could change the way an entire world saw humanity. The next day, John returned to the playroom with his cleaning cart, expecting a quieter morning. But instead, the room was filled with laughter, excitement, and chaos. The royal children had gathered all their favorite toys, some broken, some still working, and were trying to test them all at once. John sighed, pushing his cart carefully through the clutter. His eyes caught a new problem: a floating puzzle cube, glowing with tiny energy circuits, spinning unevenly and sparking in erratic patterns. One of the older children, a tall boy with shimmering green skin, was tapping on it, frustrated, muttering words John didn't understand. The cube was delicate, intricate, and clearly far more advanced than any Earth toy. The palace engineers had already given up on it, muttering that it was beyond repair. "Papa, fix it," the youngest shouted, running to him with pleading eyes. The word echoed through the room, and John felt a mix of nervousness and determination. He had fixed a starship yesterday and a dragon toy today, but this cube was new, more complicated, and clearly designed for beings far smarter than him. Still, John knelt on the smooth floor and examined the cube carefully. The glowing lines were circuits, yes, but they didn't follow logic like human machines. They were unpredictable, changing patterns like they had a mind of their own. John scratched his head, then smiled. He had an idea. Unlike the engineers who relied on tools and programs, John used something simpler: observation. He watched how the cube reacted when the children tapped it or moved it. He noticed tiny inconsistencies, a flicker here, a pause there. Slowly, he began to test his own hands-on adjustments, nudging the circuits gently, pressing small switches, twisting a corner of the cube. His movements were careful, precise, guided by intuition more than knowledge. The children crowded around him, their three-eyed faces wide with anticipation. The palace staff whispered in disbelief. "He's trying again," one muttered. "How can a human understand this?" John ignored them. He worked steadily, noticing patterns in the chaos. A flick of a switch here, a nudge of a lever there. His hands moved quickly but carefully, thinking several steps ahead. The cube trembled, sparks flying, and the children gasped. Slowly, the cube began to stabilize, its glowing patterns flowing smoothly like liquid light. "Papa!" the youngest shouted, reaching to hug John's leg. "You did it." The engineers' jaws dropped. They had been trained for years to manipulate advanced technology, yet this human janitor, with no special training and no tools, was succeeding where they had failed. One of them, an older Zyrathian with deep blue veins pulsing under translucent skin, whispered to a colleague, "How? He shouldn't be able to do this." John didn't answer. He was too focused on the cube, adjusting the final connections, aligning circuits by touch rather than calculation. Finally, the cube shimmered with a brilliant glow, spinning perfectly in the air. It projected tiny holograms, intricate patterns of stars and planets, and floated gracefully above John's hands. The children cheered loudly, their voices filling the grand playroom. Some clapped their hands, others danced around in joy. "Papa! Papa!" they shouted together. John smiled, feeling a warm pride in his chest. He had not done this to impress anyone. He had done it to make the children happy, and in doing so, he had proven something greater. The senior engineers approached cautiously. One, the older Zyrathian with glowing veins, nodded slowly. "Human, your methods are unorthodox, but effective." He sounded both astonished and respectful. "Perhaps we have misjudged your species." John shrugged modestly. "I just try to figure things out," he said simply. "Sometimes the solution is simpler than it looks." The children surrounded him, each wanting to touch the cube, to hold his hand, to call him Papa again. John realized that his bond with them had grown stronger with each success. The palace, with all its grandeur and rules, had become a place where a simple human could make a real difference. For the first time, John also noticed the reactions of the palace staff. Some were frowning, clearly uncomfortable with a human gaining admiration and influence. Others were curious, watching closely, perhaps wondering if there was something to learn from him. John laughed quietly, shaking his head. He had never imagined that being a janitor could lead to this. Yet here he was, surrounded by alien children who trusted him completely, toys that he had brought back to life, and a room buzzing with excitement. And through it all, he realized a truth he had always known about humans. Ingenuity and heart often matter more than technology or training. The day went on and John repaired more toys, some simple, some complicated, each bringing joy to the children. Every time a toy came to life, the children shouted, "Papa," and clung to him, a chorus of voices that filled the palace with warmth. By the time the sun, or what passed for a sun in this alien world, began to set, John was tired but content. He looked around at the happy children, at the humming, hovering toys, at the astonished engineers, and he smiled. He realized that human ingenuity was not just about fixing machines. It was about observing, thinking creatively, and never giving up. It was about heart, patience, and courage, the very things that no amount of alien technology could replace. And in the heart of the Zyrathian palace, the janitor had shown that a human could not only survive but thrive, not through power or authority, but through cleverness, care, and a willingness to act when others would not. The children called him Papa again, and John laughed softly, feeling a warmth he had never known before. It was a small word, a simple title, but it meant everything. By the next morning, news of John's repairs had spread throughout the palace. The royal children were full of laughter, their toys working perfectly, and their cries of "Papa, Papa," echoed through the vast corridors. But the palace was a place of rules, hierarchy, and pride, and the adults were not entirely pleased. The royal council convened in the grand chamber, a circular room with walls of glowing crystal and a ceiling that seemed to stretch into infinity. High above, shimmering banners displayed the family crest, and hovering lights bathed the chamber in a soft golden glow. The elders, tall and imposing Zyrathians with long flowing robes, sat around the circular table, their many eyes fixed on the subject of discussion, a human janitor who had won the hearts of the royal children. "He dares to touch our children's toys," one elder hissed, his glowing veins pulsing angrily. "A mere human. Does he not understand his place?" Another elder, older and quieter, shook his head. "He is effective. The toys work. The children are happy. And yet," his voice trailed, full of unease, "we cannot allow a human to gain influence in the palace, especially over the royal heirs." Meanwhile, in the playroom, John was unaware of the council's deliberations. He was helping the children with a new puzzle, a hovering orb that formed miniature holographic galaxies. The children followed his every move, their small hands imitating his actions, their eyes shining with trust and admiration. Whenever one of them succeeded, they called out, "Papa, Papa," and John laughed softly, feeling warmth spread through him. The council's disapproval soon turned to curiosity. One of the senior advisors, a stern Zyrathian with pale, translucent skin, suggested they observe the human at work before making a decision. With a nod from the eldest elder, a small group approached the playroom quietly, hiding behind columns and hovering lights. What they saw surprised them. John worked patiently, carefully guiding the children, showing them how to adjust the delicate mechanisms. He spoke softly, using gestures and simple words, and the children listened. The toys, once broken and dull, now moved gracefully, lights flickering in perfect harmony. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. "How?" one whispered. "How can a human do this?" An elder stepped closer, observing John's hands adjusting a miniature engine. "He does not rely on complex alien protocols," he murmured. "He uses intuition, observation, creativity. Perhaps there is wisdom in simplicity." John noticed the figures behind the columns and waved awkwardly. "Hello," he said. "Would you like to try?" The eldest elder froze, surprised by John's openness. One by one, the advisors stepped forward, cautiously taking the toys into their hands. Under John's guidance, they began to understand the methods he had used. It was unlike anything they had learned through their rigid training. His approach was practical, immediate, and surprisingly effective. Back in the council chamber, the elders debated more fiercely. Some argued that humans were inferior, incapable of understanding the complex needs of Zyrathian royalty. Others, however, acknowledged the undeniable results. John had not only repaired the toys, he had earned the trust and affection of the royal children, something no advanced technology or protocol could achieve. Finally, the eldest elder rose, his voice calm but firm. "Let it be known," he said, "that this human John has shown qualities that deserve respect. Not because he is a human, but because he has proven his skill, patience, and wisdom." The words echoed through the chamber, and a sense of quiet astonishment spread among the council members. They had expected defiance, chaos, or failure. Instead, they witnessed humility, ingenuity, and the ability to connect with the children on a level that no alien could replicate. John continued working in the playroom, unaware of the formal recognition taking place. The children surrounded him, laughing and shouting, Papa, Papa. Their small voices filled the room, and for the first time, John felt a true sense of belonging, not just as a janitor but as someone important, someone needed. The senior engineers who had once doubted him approached quietly. "Human," one said, bowing slightly, "your methods, we cannot ignore them. Perhaps we have much to learn from you." John smiled politely. "I'm happy to help," he said simply. "I just want the children to be happy." The council's decision was clear. John would remain in the palace, not merely as a janitor, but as a trusted figure for the children. His humility, combined with his skill and patience, had earned him a place of respect. Even the most skeptical elders could not deny the bond he had formed with the young royals. As the sun, or whatever light source governed the palace, began to cast long shadows across the hallways, John looked around the playroom. The children were busy, laughter ringing in the air, their toys glowing and moving as intended. Each time one of them looked at him and called him Papa, he felt a warmth unlike anything he had ever known. For the first time, John understood something important. Influence did not come from rank, wealth, or power. It came from trust, from the ability to solve problems, from heart, patience, and creativity. And in this grand palace, amidst the grandeur and alien sophistication, a simple human janitor had shown that he could lead, teach, and inspire, simply by being himself. As night fell, the children nestled around him, exhausted but happy, their small voices whispering, "Papa, Papa." John smiled, feeling proud, humbled, and ready for whatever challenges tomorrow would bring. He had earned more than respect. He had earned a place in the hearts of the young royals and perhaps, in time, in the palace itself. The days that followed marked a change in the palace. John was no longer just a janitor. The royal children clung to him wherever he went, calling him Papa, and following his every move. Yet John remained humble, pushing his cleaning cart, wiping floors, and picking up scattered toys. But now, every action carried weight. Every word, every gesture mattered, not just to the children but to the palace itself. It began with small moments. When a toy's power cell failed, John would carefully repair it, explaining to the children why it broke and how he fixed it. When the children argued over which game to play, he mediated, guiding them gently. Each time, his patience and calm demeanor strengthened the bond between him and the young royals. The palace staff watched in awe. Many still whispered among themselves, unsure how a human could wield such influence without rank or authority. Yet no one could deny the results. The children were happier, calmer, and more cooperative. The once disorderly playrooms now ran with a strange harmony, thanks to John's guidance. One morning a new challenge arrived. The palace had received a shipment of alien toys, each more complicated than the last. Miniature hovercrafts, self-building puzzles, and tiny robotic creatures that required constant adjustments. The royal engineers inspected them and shook their heads. "Impossible to master in a day," one murmured. "Even we cannot manage them so quickly." John, however, smiled. He had learned a simple truth. No matter how complex a machine, the right combination of observation, patience, and care could solve almost any problem. He knelt beside a hovering puzzle orb, showing the children how to touch it, how to notice patterns, and how to be gentle. Slowly the machines began to respond, spinning, glowing, and moving as intended. The children laughed and cheered, their voices echoing throughout the palace. "Papa, Papa," they shouted in unison, surrounding him in a hug that made John's chest ache with warmth. He laughed softly, shaking his head. It was hard to believe that a janitor, a simple human, could have such an impact on an alien royal family. The royal council, observing quietly from a distance, was forced to acknowledge the truth. John had earned a place in the palace, not through power, money, or status, but through his ingenuity, patience, and kindness. The eldest elder spoke quietly to the council. "This human shows us what we have long forgotten. Strength does not always come from authority. Wisdom and heart can be stronger than the most advanced technology." Slowly, the palace's attitude toward humans began to change. Other staff members started to seek John's guidance on small problems. Engineers began observing his methods, realizing that simplicity and creativity could complement their rigid protocols. Even the children's tutors found new ways to teach, inspired by the way John connected with the young royals. John never sought recognition. He continued his daily routine, sweeping, polishing, cleaning, and repairing, but he did so with a quiet confidence. Every time a toy hummed to life, every time a child smiled, he felt a small victory. And every time a child whispered, "Papa," he felt a connection that reached beyond language, species, or status. One afternoon, as John was fixing a small mechanical bird, the eldest child approached him. The boy had been quiet for a while, usually observing rather than playing. He handed John a tiny golden token, a symbol of affection among their people. "For you, Papa," he said shyly. John accepted it with a warm smile, realizing that it wasn't just about toys or repairs. It was about trust, respect, and the bond he had formed with these young beings. Even the palace engineers admitted their admiration. One approached John carefully. "You have a gift," he said. "Not just for fixing machines but for understanding them, and the children." John nodded, unsure how to respond. He only knew that he had done what he could, helped, guided, and cared. As weeks passed, John's influence grew. He began to teach the children small lessons about problem-solving, creativity, and patience. They listened eagerly, asking questions, experimenting, and learning. And with every lesson, the children called him Papa, their voices full of warmth, trust, and love. The palace, once rigid and formal, had begun to feel different. Laughter filled the halls, toys moved gracefully, and children thrived. John had shown that humans were more than their humble appearance. They could think, adapt, and inspire, even in the most alien and advanced worlds. One evening, John sat in the playroom watching the children sleep among their toys. The lights of the palace dimmed, casting soft shadows across the walls. He thought about how far he had come, from a simple janitor to someone who mattered deeply to the royal family. He smiled quietly, realizing that legacy was not about titles or wealth. Legacy was about impact, connection, and the small actions that changed lives. A repaired toy, a guiding hand, a word of encouragement. These were the things that mattered. And in that quiet palace on a distant world, John, the human janitor, had left a legacy. He had shown that humans, with their ingenuity, patience, and heart, could touch the lives of beings far beyond their own world. The royal children would never forget him. They would always call him Papa. And that, John thought, was enough.